first of all, I would love for people just to hear like some of your background, some of your experience as an entrepreneur, and also like, you know, what got you into, you know, fitness and nutrition and health and things of that nature. Like what inspired you to do that?
Here's what's interesting. I grew up in Northern California in Berkeley, and it was a very healthy, kind of health conscious place to begin with. Although my mom was from the Midwest, and literally I was raised on casseroles, like those nasty Campbell's soup casseroles with the dirty onions. And early on, I started getting super into dance and gymnastics, which is ridiculous because I wanted to be a point ballerina and a gymnast. I'm 6 feet tall, so like wasn't going to happen. And I started studying nutrition. I remember at age 12, I was like going to the library, reading everything I could find about nutrition and trying to do everything I could to become stronger and fitter. I started working out in high school with the football team in the like the men's gym area, because there was nothing back then, like there were no gyms girls could go to and lift weights. But I just was really obsessed with getting super fit and super healthy. And it drove my mom crazy because every dinner we would have like dessert, and she was always upset because I wouldn't eat any of the stuff she served. And I was always designing my own diets for myself. So I went off to college. I thought I was going to become an actress. I went to UCLA on a theater scholarship. And I started taking nutrition and exercise classes there. And there was a little fitness studio down in Westwood, and this was in the 80s, called California Shape. And I started teaching classes there. And someone called up and said, "Oh, can you come to my house and just do a private lesson?" And so they sent me over to this gal's house. And the next thing you know, I'm doing personal training. Now, there were no personal trainers, right? It was me, and we found out later it was Mark Sisson and me, embodied by Jake, the three of us doing this, that now we became personal trainers. And there really wasn't much you could learn in terms of nutrition unless you were becoming a dietitian, which I didn't really like what I was learning there. So when I graduated from UCLA, I started in biomechanics at a grad school, and I started reading everything I could find about nutrition because I knew I didn't want to be a dietitian. And then went off to doctoral school in nutrition. But here's the big clincher that changed all of this. So I remember in college at the time, you know, everyone's going to get a job and have to wear a suit and go sit in an office. And I'm thinking that sounds like the worst possible thing I could imagine. I had already was making 6 figures in cash in college in the 80s, which would be like, you know, $250,000 now. And I was doing it part-time, still going to school. And so I then moved to Florida to go to grad school at University of Miami. And one of my clients is a self-made multimillionaire. And I remember walking down the beach with her, and she says, "So why are you going to grad school?" And I go, "Oh, I want to be more successful." And she goes, "Huh, all right. And what are you going to do when you graduate from grad school?" I said, "I'm going to go to doctoral school." And she goes, "Why?" And I go, "Well, I want to be more successful. I want to help more people." And she goes, "You know, if you want to be successful and make more money, you don't need to do that." I go, "It is not about the money." Like very, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's not about the money. And she goes, "When you turn 30, that's going to change. You'll realize how important money is." Because I don't know if you remember, Brian, like in your 20s, you remember how money was like, you know, for some reason, you just didn't think you really needed it. I was making lots of money in cash, and I was traveling and having super fun, and I didn't have any kids. So I didn't really, like I had enough money. I didn't pay attention to it. But she like future paced me. And on my 30th birthday, she sent me this video about trading time for money and how to create leverage and residual. And it was like she lit my head on fire. And I literally sold my personal training business, dropped out of the PhD program I was in at USC, and I moved to Florida, and I moved in with her. And I was like, "Okay, teach me this." Turns out she was in a multi-level marketing company. She was a Hawaiian Blue Diamond in a multi-level marketing company. And she'd grown up in a trailer park. So this was all self-made. But I'll tell you what, I lived with her for 6 months, and the lessons she taught me in those 6 months, which had nothing to do with like how to build a multi-level marketing company, and everything to do with the mindset you need to have to be successful, not just in business, but successful in life. They are the things that I've used all the way through on a daily basis to be able to navigate all of the storms and fires and all the stuff that you have in business and in life. And it's really, she's the person I really credit to my success and everything that I do.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's funny that you said that. That's my background, for the last 27 years. And I've always said that, we're developing and building our community right now. The whole focus, I think, about that industry, it's yes, it gives people a platform or a vehicle to generate income, but more importantly, it gives them, the good companies that have done it right,
Mm-hmm.
it gives them a platform to level up their learning and to be able to grow. And it's just like you said, from a personal development standpoint, a mindset standpoint, awareness. And I'll never forget, there was a company called A.L. Williams. I don't know if you're familiar or have ever heard of a company called A.L. Williams.
Yeah.
Art Williams was a football coach from Cairo, Georgia. And he was one of my mentors because I got his cassette tapes one time when I was like in my early
the cassette
20s.
tapes.
Yes. And, he's someone that I've always said, I ran into people later on in life, and I went through all of his cassette tapes, and I learned and I grew, and it made me want to stack BBs when I left. And I was able to meet some people that had been in his company, and they said, look, I never made a dime in A.L. Williams, which is now called Primerica. It was in insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So he really brought term life insurance. He really exposed it as an industry and as a product that we know today. And they said, but I'm become a millionaire because of the lessons and the training and the mindset that I had.
Yes. This is so important. I had a mentor tell me once, she goes, building your own business is the biggest personal development journey you'll ever go on. And every step along the way, if you get stuck, it's not a strategy problem, it's a mindset problem, right?
Yep.
So, what I loved about my time in multi-level, and I think if everybody, when they graduated from school, had to do like 2 years in network marketing and be able to survive from that, we would have so much more successful people, because the skills you really need to develop there, the mindset tools, are lifelong.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, and today there's so many, I think it's a great opportunity for people to take those and apply them in a vehicle. And I know that you have a lot of different projects you've worked on, you've been a part of. I love the term freaky eaters. And so I'm curious, like, where did Freaky Eaters come from? Share with us a little bit about your experience as the co-host of that show and what that was all about.
Did you ever watch it?
I've never watched it. I need to, though.
Because you're not really the demographic. Because it's still, I don't know how this happens. Every time I do an Instagram live, I get these Freaky Eaters fans, and they're usually like 15 to 25-year-olds, right? And I still remember when my kids were teenagers when that show was on, and I was like the baddest mom in the neighborhood because I was the host of Freaky Eaters. So that one happened. I'd been on Dr. Phil for a couple of years, and then I got a primetime pilot, and the casting agent from that primetime pilot called me about Freaky Eaters. And I remember hearing about the show, and I was like, really? Are you kidding? But I'd gotten off Dr. Phil to do this pilot, and then that pilot hadn't gone. So I was like, forget it. I'm just not this is silly. And then that came up, and I was like, well, okay. So I went in for the audition and got the show, and it was a very interesting premise. It's sort of like My Strange Addiction meets Hoarders. And it is these people who are absolutely addicted to a specific food. They're hooked on it. It's all they'll eat, and it gets in the way of their whole life, their friends, their family, their finances, everything. They will eat this food to the detriment of everything. Like, we had one guy who was hooked on maple syrup. He put it on his burgers, his spaghetti, his cereal, like anything you can imagine. Another gal who was hooked on tartar sauce. She would coat tartar sauce on every food she had. One gal who would eat only French fries. That's the only food she would ever eat, no matter what. And as we started doing these, I mean, you can imagine the applications that we got to be on this show. It was like crazy. but it was a really fun show to do because I had a great co-host, Dr. Mike Dow, a psychotherapist. And so he approached it from like, it's your mother, it's like some deep emotional issue. And I came much more from like, what were your genetics? What are your taste buds like? What happened over here? And so we had fun doing it together, and the producers would set up these crazy situations like when we had the maple syrup dude. And the funny part about the maple syrup dude is I can't even be around maple syrup. I hate the smell of maple syrup. When I was young, I went to a restaurant and I got food poisoning at the restaurant. And I remember the smell of maple syrup at the restaurant. So I have this, like, if I'm around maple syrup, it makes me want to throw up. Well, I had to be in the scene with him where there were vats and vats and vats of maple syrup. And he basically he was having to dump the maple syrup out. Well, the maple syrup's running everywhere. It's on my feet, like it's everywhere. I'm like, bleh, it was like, bleh. But he was not going to quit this maple syrup. So we took him to a dialysis lab and showed him what it's like to have dialysis because of being diabetic, and that turned him around. So we would do crazy shock therapies with them, all sorts of stuff. Like anyway, it was really entertaining and fun, except that the contract I'd signed, and kind of one of my life lessons there was make sure that you have a really good attorney in that industry. Like my attorney at the time was not an entertainment industry guy. So the contract was basically, they could make me go anywhere all over the country and stay there, and they didn't have to fly me back for weeks on end. So I got stuck in right at the Kentucky-Ohio border at a Residence Inn and I was like, I need to get out of here, please. So I was kind of like, please cancel the show.
Oh, wow. So they sent you everywhere to do the show then?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was wherever this freaky eater was. So we ended up in, I remember being in Reading, Pennsylvania in the winter, and we had someone who had gastric bypass. And so she had this very small stomach pouch, but she was addicted to ice cream bars. And because her stomach could only hold so much, she would eat ice cream bars, one ice cream bar an hour, all day and all night. She'd wake up at night, she'd eat the ice cream bars. And so I don't know why they thought this was a great idea, but we had to basically have her march through the snow picking up ice cream sticks, but we had to march through the snow too. And of course I was like, I'm from California. I don't have snow gear,
Right.
I'm freezing,
Wow. I bet that was, but I mean, listen, I'm sure you grew a ton, have a different perspective and a lot of different models of the world.
Well, here's what's great about doing, like they talk about your 10,000 hours, and between doing 2 years on Dr. Phil, doing Freaky Eaters, and then doing a lot of I did a bunch of stuff for Food Network. When you do all that stuff, you learn how to set up sets really quickly, how to set, there's very specific ways. They call them reality shows, but it's really sort of unreality because everything is set up to really facilitate this being interesting. Now, it's more fun when it goes completely sideways. That's when we love it. But it really helps you learn how to set up great videos. So it's gotten a lot easier, really easy to do video stuff after doing all of that. So there's a lot of great learnings from it. It was super fun.
That's awesome. So, and then tell me about, which I love the name of the book, which I can tell you right now that a lot of people listening to this, they're going to go pick it up just off the name alone before they ever know anything, but Warrior Mom. And I love the name Warrior. 7 Secrets to Bold, Brave Resilience. So what inspired that book? What is the inspiration behind it? What's it about?
Yes. And for anyone who's writing a book, here's an interesting fact. You can publish a book with one name and you can republish it with a new name, because I love that name too. I think that any warrior mom or warrior dad, the minute they hear that, they get it. And it didn't publish with that name at first. I was actually doing an interview with Dr. Mark Hyman, and they said, we had to have you do this interview because you're such a warrior mom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's the title. So when I was publishing The Virgin Diet, my sons were 15 and 16. I was the sole financial support of them. And The Virgin Diet, I'd gotten this great advance from, and I knew, I'd done all this stuff. I'd done Dr. Phil. I had the TLC show. I'd been doing a lot of TV, a lot of speaking, but I was just kind of like, I wasn't breaking through. And this book, I knew could do it. Like the message was strong. It was a great, solid program. And so I went all in. I took the entire advance that the publisher gave me and I put it into marketing to do a public television show, to do a big book launch. I borrowed money to set it all up, so it wasn't enough to just do, to just do the book, the advance. I added more. So I was all in, like I'd burned the bridges, burned the boats. I had to make this work. And a month before this happens, my son was out crossing the street and got hit by a car and left for dead in the street, and literally left for dead. He was airlifted to the local hospital. And when we got there, they told us that we needed to let him go, to let him die. And they said the injury he had, torn aorta, was one of the injuries. And they said it was going to rupture sometime in the next 24 hours if it wasn't repaired. But the challenge was he also had multiple brain bleeds and was in a deep coma. And the surgery that he needed was super specialized. And he would have to be airlifted to another hospital. And they said, he'll never survive the airlift to another hospital. And even if he were to survive that airlift, he's not going to survive that surgery. And even if he were to survive that surgery, he'd be so brain damaged, it wouldn't be worth it. Now, any parent, like when I tell this in a room where I can see people and I'm like, are there parents here? Because, the minute you say that, the parents are like, ooh, sucking the breath. And I remember hearing this doctor say this, and, he'd been a trauma doc for a long time, but he was a trauma doc in Palm Springs. And in Palm Springs, if an 85-year-old comes in and they have 13 fractures, they're in a deep coma, and they've got a torn aorta, it's a very different situation than a 16-year-old. And mainly he saw 85-year-olds. And my 15-year-old son's looking at the doctor and said, well, it sounds like maybe a 0.25% chance he'd make it. Because in our family, you just look for the possibility, you don't look at what isn't going to happen. And so he said, yeah, that's about right, son. And Bryce said, well, we'll take those odds. So we overruled the doctor and we had him airlifted to Harbor, UCLA. And I drove through the night to get there and got there. And it was an entirely different situation. 5 surgical teams. It was like, game on, we got this. Don't worry, he'll be fine. And he was fine. They fixed his aorta, but he was in a deep coma. And he had 13 fractures, had to rod both of his femurs. He had a crushed heel that at one point they're like, we don't know if he'll ever walk again. I'm like, you know what? At the time, I'm like, pretend this is Kobe Bryant here in this bed and treat him like you would treat him, because he's an athlete, he's going to walk. And so he came out of the coma, and I can tell you that coming out of a coma is not like what they show you on the movies. It's not what I thought it would be, which is wake up, hi mom, I love you. It was months and months and actually years of really difficult situations where when you have that level of a traumatic brain injury, first of all, he had to learn everything all over again. I mean, it took him over a month to even talk. He had to learn how to talk, how to eat, how to go to the bathroom, how to brush his teeth, every single thing all over again, who he was, his name, everything. And then he went through all of when you have a traumatic brain injury, your brain is super unstable. So he would go into deep depression, suicidal, rage. And this took years, but I made a commitment that first night in the hospital. I was holding his hand and I said, Grant, you're a warrior. Your name means warrior. And you're going to be 110%. And I can bring in all the troops and everything we need to get there, but you have to fight. You have to fight. And so that was just my mantra this whole time through was you're going to be 110%. And the challenging thing was I realized that Grant needs to be 110%. And in order for Grant to be 110%, this book has to, like the Virgin Diet coming out, has to kill it. And I need to be here and I need to make this book go. And how the heck am I going to do that? And what I decided to do was to, number one, make sure that I had my self-care absolutely dialed. I walked into this situation super healthy, but I made sure I stayed there because you can't go into an ICU if you're sick. and you can't show up and make life and death decisions and all of this if you're not on your game. So I was getting my sleep, I was exercising, I was eating right, I was taking loads of supplements. And I basically launched a New York Times bestseller, Bedside with My Son in a Coma. And that gave me the financial means to do everything I needed to do, that I can now tell you it took 7 years, but my son is better than before the accident.
How old is he now?
He is 24.
Wow, that's amazing. So tell me, like, experiencing something like that, like, I have a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 13-year-old. And I'm a helicopter dad. I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and I was like, I get like so anxious over the littlest things, because my 6 and 7-year-old boys are wild. And I'm like,
Well,
but
they're
like,
supposed to be, they're boys.
yeah. And I was like, but what they do, I did 10 times crazier. Right. So like what, like, and who cares if they scrape or twist their ankle? But I guess my curiosity would be to go through that. What did you focus on? What were some of the things that were able to get you through it? Because obviously that's probably more traumatic, one might say, on the parent than maybe even the
Oh
child.
yeah, I would have traded places with him. I still would. Absolutely. Um, and by the way, he's not my crazy son. I have my son who's the tricker, and he was a free runner. He would like do stunts off buildings. Who's torn his tibia, like he's broken. No, Grant was always the cautious one. I'm like, wait a minute. So you just never know. So that mentor that I had when I was 30, who, I thought I was going in to get trained on how to have a successful business. And she trained me on how to be successful at life. One of the first things that she taught me was to get rid of the limiting beliefs, that the only limitation is the limitation in your mind. And so she made me wear these rubber bands around my wrist. And every time I had a limiting belief, I was supposed to snap the rubber band and say, cancel, cancel. And by the way, like, you do this and you realize all the crazy self-talk of limiting beliefs that can be out there. So she really helped me see things so differently that by the time that this thing happened with Grant, it was how I raised my kids. I mean, just for Bryce at 15 to look at a doctor and say, yeah, we'll take those odds. We're going to overrule you. And to just only see the 0.25% and literally say, well, that's not zero, right? The kids were raised to think that way. Like, Grant's never thought of himself as a victim. He, we always say, Grant 1, car 0, and the car hit him going 40 miles an hour. Like, nothing makes sense when you really look at how this went down. But the reason that he is alive today is purely mindset. And when I wrote the book Warrior Mom, and I was talking about these lessons, because people kept saying, how the heck did you do that? How did you do that? And I'd forgotten about my mentor at 30 and the lessons that she taught me, because they were just in me. They were no longer something I never was like every day going, oh, thank you, Kay, because it became who I was. And that's what saved Grant. And this is what's important when you look at it. When you look at the people who are really successful, and Elizabeth Gilbert says it great, and it's the quote I put in that book, is like, the people who are my superheroes are not the people who had it easy. They're the people who got knocked down, they get back up, they've gone through the crap. Those people are my superheroes. When you look at the most successful people, they just got better at handling the tough stuff. My mentor at 30 said, don't wish it was easier, make yourself better. And so I just have been fortunate. I've gone through a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the stuff is what makes up the melody of our lives. I've always said that. And I think that, what's interesting, and we talk a lot about that, and I hope people hear the message loud and clear, is that, it's about how we're wired. It's about how we're programmed. And then, once you program yourself that way, it becomes unconscious competence, right? Yeah. Like, it so well that you're just reacting, right? It's repetition. And I know that for many that have heard of you, and for those that haven't, you also do a podcast.
I do. It's just changed. So um, it was interesting. We were doing these interviews, and then we were doing me solo, and then I was doing this little Friday Q&A, and the Friday Q&A was the most popular. So we just it was my project during lockdown is to do all of these. And we just launched Ask the Health Expert with JJ Virgin. And it's all the questions. So all it is these little daily quickies where you take a listener question and then I put the answer there. And it's been super fun and really easy to do. So
That's very good. And so the questions about business, about fitness, about
nope.
health, about all of it, or?
It's been a very interesting straddle because I've really kept these two, kind of the intersection between my two businesses has been mindset, but I've had a consumer brand, which is all the health stuff. And then I have my business brand, which is really geared towards people in the health space called Mindshare, where we get healthcare professionals together and really help them go from practitioner to thought leader. And so that one, I have the Mindcast. That's the Mindshare Mindcast. It's a separate podcast, but there are two separate ones, and the twains don't meet, really.
So what would you recommend for anyone? Because it's mostly entrepreneurs, obviously people that are pursuing better, that are tuning in. So what's kind of one or two tips, or if you want to call hacks, that you would give them to perform at an optimal level? I mean, I've already heard you give some incredible nuggets. For instance, expect stuff that's going to happen to you, but that stuff is going to be the highlights, right? It's what you're willing to go through to get where you want to go. But what are some things that you would share with them to perform at an optimal level every single day?
I love that book, Go the F to Sleep. Isn't
Sleep
that
is a weapon, right? Sleep's a weapon.
Like I'm wearing my Aura ring, and man, if there's one thing that you have to perform at the highest level, like I'm going to say there's two things, and one is sleep. Like you can't pull it off without great sleep. So prioritize sleep, because I think people just don't, right? They just, they steal from sleep, and don't do that. And track it and really figure out what you need to do to optimize your sleep. I wear my my blue blocking little red glasses at night. I do a little Epsom salts bath every night. I try to do a sauna, then an Epsom salts bath. And then majorly turn down the temperature. So get all your stuff in so you can really set yourself up for that amazing sleep. But the biggest thing of all, and this is what's so awesome, like you look at it and go, sleep is free. So, everyone can sleep well. Of course, the better your mattresses and stuff, the better you're going to sleep. But sleep is one. And the other one that's a total choice, which you talked about, is, we are what we think about. And all of the work that you can do, and it has to be on a consistent, regular basis, will make all the difference. One of the first things that Kay taught me to do was to carefully manage my environment, what I listened to, who I was around, what I read. And it's been challenging over the last couple months. I've never been someone who's watched the news or paid attention to things. And I rarely pay attention to social media. And last couple months, I've been like got sucked straight into the news, which I'd never been paying attention to before. And, but it's kind of like, okay, well, can I go to that state right now, or is that state closed? So because I started to notice it was taking its toll on me, really be careful of the people you hang out with, right? One of the things that one of my mentors in business said is, you may find that your friends are changing. And, sometimes you have to change friends, because sometimes your friends are like the crabs trying to hold you down from crawling out of the crab pot, right?
Yeah.
So, it's so super important to really work, and it's an ongoing, forever process to continue to exercise that mindset. It is a muscle. Look at Carol Dweck's work. You can either have that fixed mindset where you're a victim and life happens to you, or it can be life happening for you and through you, and you've got growth mindset, and you realize how much of your success is a mental game. And it's it's not about a money thing. No one's ever given me, like, I've worked and gotten everything I've ever gotten. I've never had investments of it. Like, it's been all me,
Right.
So you can, and it's all from my mindset.
No, that's all. Yeah. I mean, and success without fulfillment's failure. And I don't think you ever get fulfillment with something given to you. My dad used to always say that anything of value is going to take effort and investment or sacrifice, either way you want to look at it. And so, yeah, I think that's beautiful. I'm a huge believer in power of peer group and the power of environments. I'm glad that you said that. I think that, you can't choose your family, but love your family, choose your peer group, choose your friends wisely. I have a friend that just told me 2 days ago, he said, there was a situation I was going through, and he said, this is just a great reminder that be very, very careful and mindful of the counsel that you have personally and in business, right? The counsel that you seek, because they all have influence on your brain, on your mindset, on the way the lenses that you view, or the filter that you're viewing any given situation. And it's all situation, right? It's all situational. And, we might not be able to control the situations that come up in our life, but we can always control how we respond to it. Not react, but respond. So, well, I appreciate you spending time with us. Hopefully you'll come back and we'll be able to get maybe more into some depth on fitness and exercise and how it affects body and stress, and maybe go into more details about some of your work. I know for me, this was a great opportunity to just introduce you to our community and have them check you out. If you don't mind, share with them your podcast and how they can tune in, and your Instagram channel, and definitely check out the book Warrior Mom. I think it's a must, but let them know how they can connect with you.
Thank you. Well, probably the easiest is to go to jjvirgin.com. That's where podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, all that is. And then on the business side, it's Mindshare.
Mindshare what? I'm sorry.
Mindsharecollaborative.com.
Awesome. So check out JJ Virgin. We definitely appreciate your time. It was a lot of fun, and be safe on your travels back to Paradise, California.